Hi everybody, it's Stephanie and this is lesson 20. So lesson 20 is a review lesson, review number 4 on our course. This is level B2. I'm Stephanie and this is lesson 20. Now, in this lesson, we're going to look back at lessons 1 through to 19. So we're going to be reviewing what we've covered in these lessons. We've looked at a lot of new vocabulary, we've reviewed key grammar points, and we've also expanded to new tenses as well. So there's lots for us to look at. Review is really, really important for you to be able to assimilate, to use the new structures and words correctly. So lots of practice today. We're also going to have a look at can-do statements. And by this I mean we're going to think about, at this point, if you followed the course, what you can do now. So lots of positive things in our lesson today. Okay, so looking back at lesson 1, we looked at question forms and we talked about how important it is to be able to ask questions correctly in order to create a good impression when you're using English. And question forms are important no matter how you use English, whether it's for business, whether it's socially, you're going to need to be able to ask and answer questions. So our first practice today, we're going to have a look at 5 questions, but I've changed the word order. So your task is to change the words to make 5 questions for me. So have a look at these 5 statements. They're all in the wrong order. You need to move the words to make 5 questions. So pause the slide and then we will check together. Okay, so number 1, do you know what time the train leaves? Number 2, what does this word mean? Number 3, does Ian work here? Number 4, have you finished the report? And number 5, is she able to speak English? Well done if you got those 5 correct, that's great. If you haven't, don't worry, but maybe go back and have a look at lesson 1 when we talk about this in more detail. Okay, lesson 2 was a vocabulary lesson, and our topic in lesson 2 was illness. So we practiced describing different illnesses, and we also talked about symptoms because it's important to be able to describe how you feel. So our task for lesson 2, I'm going to describe 5 different symptoms or illnesses, and I want you to tell me what's being described. Number 1, a temporary feeling that your sense of balance is not good and you may fall down. Number 2, to force air out of your lungs through your throat with a short, loud sound. Number 3, a medical condition in which the body temperature is higher than usual. Number 4, a condition where a person becomes unwell because they've been near a certain substance. And number 5, a lot of small red spots on the skin. Pause the slide and see if you can tell me what 5 things are being described here. Okay, let's check our answers. So, number 1, I was talking about dizziness. When you feel that you're going to fall over, I feel dizzy. Dizziness is the noun, dizzy is the adjective. Number 2, this is a cough. When you're clearing your throat, this is a cough. Remember, we talked about the unusual spelling and pronunciation. So even though there's a GH, the pronunciation is cough with a F. Number 3, when your temperature is very high, I have a fever. Number 4, allergy is when you have a reaction if you're near a certain substance, maybe an ingredient, maybe pollen or a type of plant. If you have a reaction to this, you have an allergy to it. And number 5, when you have red mark on your skin, this is a rash. Well done if you got those correct. Lesson 3, we looked at question forms for the second time because, as I said, it's a very big topic and a very important topic, so we looked at this twice. Our task to review Lesson 3 is for you to tell me, are these questions correct or have I made a mistake and they're incorrect? Let's have a look and see if you know. Number 1, didn't start the meeting at 9 a.m. Number 2, why you aren't coming on the trip? Number 3, haven't studied you English before. Number 4, doesn't work she here. And number 5, why we don't ask for help. And what do you think? Are these correct or incorrect? Pause the slide and consider your answer. Well, in fact, they are all incorrect. Yes, I've made a mistake on every question there. Number 1 should be, didn't the meeting start at 9 a.m? Number 2, why aren't you coming on the trip? Number 3, haven't you studied English before? Number 4, doesn't she work here? And number 5, why don't we ask for help? Okay, so if you have any confusion about this, go and have a look at Lesson 3 where we talk about this in more detail. Moving on then to Lesson 4, where our topic was healthcare. Okay, in Lesson 4 we discussed healthcare and we thought about healthcare in different places. We talked about different types of healthcare, whether it's more traditional or more alternative. We also looked at some verb-noun collocations. Learning verb and noun collocations is a really key way of improving your English because it makes it much more accurate because you learn the verb with the noun that commonly go together. So our practice for Lesson 4, there are 5 verb and noun collocations. You need to tell me which is the correct verb. Number 1, to put up or put on weight. 2, to make or do a speedy recovery. 3, to give up or give in smoking. 4, to throw or to catch a cold. And 5, to feel or make poorly. Pause the slide and choose which is the correct verb. Okay, so the first one, to put on weight. A nice phrasal verb here. If you eat too much and you don't exercise, probably you will put on weight. Number 2, to make a speedy recovery, to get better quickly. Number 3 is another nice phrasal verb, to give up smoking, meaning quit, stop. And number 4, to catch a cold. Remember the irregular past, catch, caught, caught. And number 5, to feel poorly, meaning to feel unwell. Really well done if you got all of those correct. Okay, so that brought us to Lesson 5. So let's look at what you can do if you've studied Lessons 1, 2, 3 and 4. So you can use auxiliary verbs to make questions. You can use who, what, where, when, which, and why. You can understand when to use negative questions. You can describe different types of illness, and you can talk about symptoms. You can use verb and noun collocations in this context. And you can talk about issues in healthcare. So as you can see, that's a lot of things that you can do now if you've studied 1, 2, 3 and 4. Really well done. Okay, Lesson 6, we moved on to another grammar topic, and this was an important one for British English. The tense is present perfect, which is something we use a lot. So To start with, let's have a look at the difference between present perfect and past simple. So these two tenses, it's very easy to confuse. And in lesson 6, we talked a lot about the difference between present perfect and past simple. So your task is to look at the pairs of sentences and tell me which one is correct. Sentence A, I have seen him yesterday. Or B, I saw him yesterday. A, the castle has been built in 1510. Or B, the castle was built in 1510. A, I have visited Berlin twice. Or B, I visited Berlin twice. So as you notice, all the A's are present perfect and all the B's are past simple. Which one is correct in each pair? Pause the slide and then we will check. Okay, let's have a look at the answers. So B, I saw him yesterday. The key word here is yesterday. Finished in the past, past simple. The same with pair 2. The castle was built in 1510. Specific time reference, finished in the past, past simple. But the third pair, it's A. I have visited Berlin twice. I'm not giving a time reference here. I'm talking about my general experience, which is when we need the present perfect. So as I said, it's quite an important area, this. So if you're not sure, if you're still a bit confused, go back and review lesson 6. Lesson 7, we had a change of topic. We moved on to some vocabulary and we talked about describing personality. We looked at a lot of positive adjectives and negative adjectives. And your task now is to tell me which of these words are positive words to use to describe somebody. Grumpy, trustworthy, bossy, reliable, jealous, down to earth, nosy, chatty, and generous. All of these are adjectives you can use to describe personality, but which are positive? Pause the slide and tell me which 5. Okay, let's have a look. So hopefully you identified that trustworthy, reliable, down to earth, chatty, and generous are all really positive words to describe somebody. What's useful to remember these are think about people you can describe using these words. For example, reliable, meaning dependable. Somebody who, if they say to you, I will arrive at 9 a.m., you know at 9 a.m. they will arrive. You can believe what they say. This is a reliable person. Do you know anybody who you would describe as reliable? So associating the words with a person is another strategy you can use to remember and retain the vocabulary. Okay, lesson 8 was our second look at the present perfect. And we also talked a lot about the difference between for and since, which you will often need to use if you're using a present perfect tense. So can you remember, when do we use for and when do we use since? Well, to practice, I've got 5 sentences and you need to choose which one to use in each one. Number 1, I haven't seen her yesterday. 2, I haven't seen her ages. 3, I've lived here 5 years. 4, I've lived here 2012. And number 5, I've studied English a long time. For or since? Pause the slide and then we will check together. Okay, so number 1, I haven't seen her since yesterday. I haven't seen her for ages. I've lived here for 5 years. I've lived here since 2012. I've studied English for a long time. So remember, we're using since if we refer to a specific point, yesterday, 2012. But for is describing the period, 4 ages, 4, 5 years, for a long time. Well done if you got those correct. If you're not sure, have a look back at lesson 8 where we talk about it in more detail. Okay, lesson 9, we moved on to a vocabulary topic, and this time we were describing experiences. So when we think about being a level B2, we need to have a very rich vocabulary to describe. Something isn't simply good or bad. We need to have a richer vocabulary to be more expressive and to describe in more detail. So lesson 9, we had a lot of new words, and we're going to practice some of those now. So again, there are 5 sentences, and I need you to tell me which is the most appropriate, the most suitable word for the context. So I've given you 2 options, but only one suits the situation. Number 1, camping under the stars was a dire or wonderful experience. The Museum of Modern Art has some bizarre or intimidating art. Breaking my leg was a horrendous or unbelievable experience. 4. The 3-hour traffic jam was awful or rewarding. And 5. Visiting the pyramids was unforgettable or dire. So all of these words are correct, but only one of them really fits the sense of the context. So pause the slide and see if you can choose which one. Okay, number 1, camping under the stars was a wonderful experience. Even if you thought it was negative, dire would be too strong to use in this situation. Number 2, the Museum of Modern Art has some bizarre art. Remember, bizarre means odd, strange, unusual. Number 3, breaking my leg was a horrendous experience. So again, horrendous is a strong negative adjective. Number 4, the 3-hour traffic jam was awful. Here, it's not going to be rewarding. It's not going to make you feel positive, so you must choose awful. And number 5, visiting the pyramids was unforgettable, something that stayed in your memory. So well done if you got those correct. Okay, so let's have a look then at can-do statements by the time we reach lesson 10. So now you can contrast present perfect and past simple tenses. You can use present perfect and present perfect continuous. And you can use these with just, already, and yet. You can recognise when to use for and when to use since. You can use the construction, have you ever? You can use positive and negative adjectives to describe personality. And you can use a range of adjectives to talk about your experiences. So if you look at this, there's a lot of things that you can do now, which hopefully makes you feel very positive. So well done for reaching lesson 10. Okay, we then moved on to lesson 11, in which we talked about narrative tenses. And the first thing we did here was a tense review, which I think was very useful because we looked at different tenses and we talked about how we make them, how they're formed, but also why we need them, how we use them. So our first task here is to look at these 5 sentences, and all I want you to do is to name the tense. Which tense is being used? Number 1, it had been snowing. 2, a man was cycling. 3, the patient has been waiting. 4, I am teaching. And 5, I have finished. Pause the slide and simply tell me what's the tense. Okay, let's have a look at this together. Okay, so number 1, it had been snowing is past perfect continuous. Number 2 is past continuous. 3, present perfect continuous. 4 is present continuous. And 5 is present perfect. If you're not sure about any of these, it's a really good idea to go back and have a look again at lesson 11 because we do talk about them in more detail in the lesson. Lesson 12, we moved on to one of my favourite topics, which is talking about travel. And one of the things we looked at is the difference between some British English and American English words. So there are some differences between British and American English, and we looked at this in the context of travel. So, can you remember? I'm going to show you 5 words, and I want you to tell me, are these British English or American English words? And maybe if you want to do something extra, you could think about what the other word is. So, for example, if I've given the British word, what's the American alternative? Let's have a look at the words. So we have pavement, elevator, apartment, taxi, and holiday. Are they British or American? Pause the slide and think about it. Okay, so pavement, yes, this is British English. Do you know the American word? Sidewalk. 2, elevator is American. The British word is lift. 3, apartment is American. The British word is flat. Taxi is British. If you're in America, you would ask for a cab. And number 5, again, holiday is British. If you're in America, you would go on vacation. Yeah. So here, really, it depends. If you watch a lot of American films, movies, then probably you are more familiar with the American words. But maybe you had a British English teacher, in which case you might recognise the British versions instead. Doesn't matter, they're both correct. It's just interesting to look at the difference. Okay. Lesson 13 was our second look at narrative tenses, which we talked about as being useful when you want to tell a story, tell an anecdote about something that happened. And when you do this, it's very important to be able to put the events in the right order. What happened first? What happened next? So we practiced using time expressions like before, then, while, during, and that's what we're going to practice now. So again, 5 sentences. You tell me which is the correct word or expression. Number 1. While or during the meeting, his phone rang. 2. After or before he scored, the crowd cheered. 3. As or then she arrived, she saw her boss. 4. Just then, or while they were waiting, the alarm went off. And number 5, as soon as or by the time the plane took off, the turbulence started. So pause the slide and choose the correct answer. Okay, number 1, during the meeting, his phone rang. 2, after he scored, the crowd cheered. 3, as she arrived, she saw her boss. 4, while they were waiting, the alarm went off. And 5, as soon as the plane took off, the turbulence started. Okay, so if you have any confusion there, go and have a look at lesson 13. In particular, we look at the difference between while and during, which are 2 quite easy words to confuse. So in lesson 13, we do look at the difference between these 2 words and why we use while and why we use during. So any confusion, go and have a look at lesson 13. Okay, lesson 14, we thought about descriptive adjectives. So again, it was a lot of vocabulary in this lesson, a lot of new words. And one of the areas we looked at is when do we use ed and when do we use ing? So think about, there's a lot of examples of this, tiring and tired, exciting, excited, disappointing, disappointed. It's the same root, but when do we use disappointed and when do we use disappointing? Can you remember? We're going to practice with 5 sentences. Choose the correct option and think about why. 1. It was disappointing or disappointed that not many people came. 2. Speaking a foreign language all day can be tiring or tired. 3. I felt exciting or excited to start my new job. 4. I was thrilling or thrilled to be chosen. And 5. It's annoying or annoyed when people talk in the cinema. So, the adjective makes sense, but grammatically you need to choose the correct version and think about why. So pause the slide and then we'll check together. Okay, number 1. It was disappointing that not many people came. Speaking a foreign language all day can be tiring. I felt excited to start my new job. I was thrilled to be chosen. And it's annoying when people talk in the cinema. So looking at these, can you identify when do we use ed and when do we use ing? Hopefully, if you look at 3 and 4, you can see that I'm talking about my feeling. I felt excited. I was thrilled. When you're talking about your feeling, you use ed. When you're talking about the situation in general, that's when you need ing. It's annoying. It was disappointing. So that's quite a nice rule to remember so that you use these accurately. Good. And then we reach lesson 15. So let's have a look at some can-do statements if you've studied up to lesson 15. So I can use a range of tenses to tell anecdotes. I can describe travel experiences. I can recognise the difference between British and American vocabulary. I can use phrasal verbs connected to travel. I can use time expressions to order events in the past. And I can use ed and ing adjectives correctly. So well done. Lesson 16 was our first look at the passive tense. And one of the first things we talked about was the difference between an active sentence and a passive sentence. So to practice this, there are 5 sentences. Just tell me, is it active or is it passive? Number 1, the Romans built the castle. 2, I was told to wait here. 3, all trains to Manchester are delayed. 4, the president gave a speech. 5, the report was written on time. Pause the slide and tell me, is it an active or a passive sentence? Let's look at the answers. So number 1 is active. 2 and 3 are passive. 4 is active. And 5 is passive. So have a look at your active sentences and you can see that in numbers 1 and 4, we know who is doing the action. We know the agent, the Romans or the president. But in 2, 3 and 5, we're not told who. We also talked about if you want to say who, you can add by. So example, I was told to wait here by my boss. But this is an example of a passive sentence, maybe because the agent is unimportant or the agent is something we don't know. Okay, so if you'd like to review the passive, have a look back at lesson 16. Okay. Lesson 17 was another big vocabulary lesson. We talked about crime and punishment. And we talked about how this is an important area if you read or watch the news. Also, if you're studying exam English, because it's a topic that comes up a lot and you might be asked to give your opinion on this. So let's have a look at 5 different crimes. I've given you 5 descriptions, but what is the crime? Number 1, illegally entering a building and stealing things. Number 2, stealing things out of people's pockets or bags. 3, an act of attacking someone and stealing their money. 4, getting money by deceiving people. And 5, intentionally killing a person. So pause the slide and see if you can tell me what crimes are being described here. Okay, how did you do? Let's have a look at the answers together. So number 1 was burglary, 2 is pickpocketing, 3 is mugging, 4 is fraud, and 5 is murder. So have a think about where you live. What types of crime are common in your town or city or village? Do you think the types of crime are changing? Why do you think this is? So some interesting things to consider from lesson 17. Lesson 18, we expanded our use of the passive and we thought about lots of different passive tenses. To practice, I've got 5 sentences and I need you to choose the correct word. So this is practicing the different tenses we looked at in lesson 18. 1. The room was being or been cleaned when I arrived. 2. My bag has being or been stolen. 3. When was or is the building constructed? 4. Your query was or is being dealt with at the moment. And 5. My computer was fixed or fix this morning. Again, pause the slide and choose. Think about the sentence, think about the tense. What tense is being used? So which word do you need to construct this accurately? Okay, so let's look at the answers. My room was being cleaned. My bag has been stolen. When was the building constructed? Your query is being dealt with at the moment. My computer was fixed this morning. If you're not sure about any of these, lesson 18, we review these different tenses. We think about how they're constructed and there's some practice there. So if you're confused, have a look back again at lesson 18. Okay, and the last lesson we had together was lesson 19. And in lesson 19, we talked about the weather. So the weather is a big topic in England. We talk about it a lot because it's so unpredictable. It's always changing and we never know what's going to happen. So there's a lot of vocabulary in lesson 19. And to practice, I'm going to give you 5 weather descriptions and I want you to tell me what weather is being described. So number 1, a lot of rain in a short time. 2, the sudden loud noise that comes from a storm. 3, a light and pleasant wind. 4, thick cloud making it difficult to see. And 5, a flash of bright light in the sky that's produced by electricity. So pause the slide and think about what type of weather is being described. Okay, let's check our answers together. So number 1 is a downpour, 2 is thunder, 3 is breeze, 4 is fog, and number 5 is lightning. Well done if you got those correct. So So that brings us up to date to lesson 20. So let's have a look at the can-do statements. If you've reached lesson 1 all the way through to lesson 19, let's look at what you can do. I can recognise the difference between active and passive sentences and understand when it's appropriate to use the passive. I can accurately construct a range of passive tenses. I can describe different types of crime and consider different forms of punishment. I can talk about the justice system, and I can talk about what type of crime is a problem where I live. And the final lesson in lesson 19, if you've studied this, you can talk about the weather, climate, and the problems of natural disasters caused by extreme weather conditions. So again, there's a lot that's been covered. And if you've studied lessons 16, 17, 18, and 19, this is what you can do. So you should feel very pleased with yourself. Well done for reaching lesson 20. I hope you found it a useful lesson. I know I keep saying it, but review, and practice is the best way to retain the new words and structures. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time for lesson 21. Goodbye for now.